You already did the work. You sat somewhere quiet and told yourself the money was handled, the account was full, the pressure was over. And underneath all of it, a small, flat voice said, "This is a lie. You know it is a lie. You are an ordinary person in an ordinary room, saying words about money you do not have." That voice is why you stopped. Most people hear it and call it doubt. They try to pray it away, or affirm louder, or start over on a Monday. Doubt is the wrong name for it. What you were actually feeling is far more ordinary, and Neville Goddard put a name on it in a lecture he gave in March of 1968, after somebody told him plainly that people did not understand the word he leaned on constantly. He put a number on it that night, too, and the number is stranger than you would expect. And years before that lecture, there was an evening when his teacher Abdullah refused to let him out of a state he was desperate to leave. That refusal was the whole lesson. The feeling of wealth, practiced by somebody who has no money yet, is supposed to feel fake. That is not a malfunction. Fake is the correct reading on the instrument, and because nobody says that out loud, you assumed the fakeness was evidence. Evidence that you were doing it wrong, that you were not one of the people it works for, that your faith was too thin to hold. So you quit at the exact point where the work actually begins. Think about what you have been measuring. You sit down, you assume the state, and then you check the feeling like a man checking a wound. Does it feel true yet? Does it feel real yet? And when the answer is no, you take that as the verdict. But you are asking a question that cannot be answered yes on day one by anyone, ever. You are holding a brand new thing and complaining that it does not feel old. So let us go back to that room in 1968. He called the talk Infinite States. And the question he was answering that night is the question you have never thought to ask. Neville had been teaching for decades by then. He had one word he leaned on constantly. State. Enter the state. Occupy the state. Leave one state. Move into another. And the question finally came back to him. In effect, we do not know what you mean by that word. Would you explain it? His answer was plainer than people expect. A state, he said, is an attitude of mind, a state of experience with a body of beliefs which you live by. And then he pointed at how ordinary it is. You are always expressing one, he said. You identify yourself with it every time you open your mouth. I am poor, or I am rich. I am known, or I am unknown. I am wanted, or I am unwanted. Something is buried in that list. Every item is a sentence you have said about yourself this week. Not a philosophy, not a technique, a sentence. Nobody travels to a state on a special night with candles and a script. It is the ordinary running commentary you are already producing, all day, without effort, and mostly without noticing. Your bank balance is not the poverty. Poverty is a body of beliefs you live inside so completely that it has stopped sounding like an opinion and started sounding like the weather. There was one more thing he said in that room, and it is the part I most want you to hear, because it takes a weight off you that you have probably been carrying since childhood. He said that when you find yourself in a state or see somebody else in one, you do not condemn it and you do not praise it. All states exist. No state is greater than another. That contradicts almost everything you were raised on. Poverty in this teaching carries no verdict about your character. It is not a grade, not what you deserved, not what you attracted through some flaw you cannot locate, and not evidence that you are lazy or unlucky or spiritually second-rate. A state is a room. Rooms carry no morality. You are in one, other people are in others, and the room you are standing in tonight says precisely nothing about your worth as a man or a woman. This matters far more than it sounds like it matters. Because shame is heavy, and a person carrying shame about their finances cannot bear to look at the subject at all. He avoids the numbers, avoids the conversation, avoids the entire area of his own life, and the avoidance keeps him exactly where he is. You cannot walk out of a room you refuse to admit you are standing in. So put the verdict down. There is no such thing as a poor man. There is a man presently occupying poverty. Those are different sentences, and only one of them has a door in it, which leaves you with a problem. If you are already inside one, and it feels like plain reality rather than a position you took, how would you ever get out? Neville answered that with the most unremarkable story he ever told. No angels, no visions, a suit. He paid $30 for his first suit. That is the whole prop. He asked the room whether they had ever owned a suit of clothes, so knew they were conscious of it every moment. Then he told them about his own. He walked down Fifth Avenue in that first suit, certain, absolutely certain, that every person he passed could tell it was new, that they were noticing, that there was something obvious and faintly embarrassing about him. People passing paid no attention to me, he said. But I was so aware, so conscious of my new suit. Nobody looked. The entire performance was running inside one man's head, on a street full of people thinking about their own afternoons. Now hold that image, because he did something with it that most people who quote him miss entirely. He said, "The same is true for a state. When the suit is new, I am aware of it. Let me wear it long enough for it to feel natural, and I will no longer be conscious of it." That is the whole mechanism, and it is the part nobody hands you. The self-consciousness you feel when you assume wealth is identical to the self-consciousness of a man in a new suit. It is not a signal about whether the suit is yours. You paid for it. It is hanging on your body. It is 100% yours. The discomfort is reporting one fact, and one fact only, that it is new. And new wears off. It wears off through nothing but time spent inside it. He said it directly, in the line they pulled out to headline that entire lecture. If the state of affluence is new, you think everyone knows it, but no one knows or cares whether you are rich or poor. So walk in the state until it becomes natural. And then the sentence immediately after it, which is the one I would put on the wall. The moment the feeling is natural, wealth is yours. Not the moment the money lands, the moment the feeling stops being remarkable. Walk in it. Not visit it, not test it, not audit it nightly for signs of delivery. And notice what he says about the audience for all this. No one knows or cares. That embarrassment you feel, the sense that you are play acting at a life above your station, that somebody is going to catch you, that it is somehow dishonest to sit in your circumstances and quietly hold a different self-image. The world at large is not an observer. No stranger is checking your credentials. The only person in the world who has noticed you are wearing something new is you. Let me be precise here, because this is where people take Neville and turn him into something he was not. Nowhere is he telling you to go buy a suit. There is nothing in the fabric. The suit works as an illustration and nothing else, with no power sitting inside the object. He reached for it because it is the most common experience of a new state that his audience would have had that week. The whole point is that it is trivial. If a $30 suit can make a grown man feel watched by strangers who are not watching, then of course a new identity does the same thing, and for the same reason, and with the same expiry. So the question stops being, does this feel true? The question becomes, how long? And there is an objection sitting in the room, which will quietly cancel all of this if it goes unanswered. Is this not just denial? Am I not simply lying to myself about my situation while the bills stack up on the counter? It deserves a straight answer. No. And the difference is exact. Denial is the refusal to look at a fact. A man in denial does not open the envelope. He tells his wife the situation is under control when it is not. He behaves as though the number is different than it is, and then he acts on that fiction in the physical world, and the physical world sends him the bill for it. Nothing in this teaching asks you to do that. The law of assumption runs entirely on the imagination, and you will not find Neville Goddard prescribing conduct with your money in it. No instruction to misreport a balance, skip a payment, or spend what is not there. You look at the number. Open the envelope. Do the arithmetic once, in daylight, like an adult. What changes is what you do with that number afterward. The man in the old state takes the figure and turns it into an identity. This is who I am. This is what I am worth. This is the kind of life I have. The man in the new state takes the same figure, calls it what it is, a present reading of a present condition, and declines to build himself out of it. Denial hides the number. This teaching leaves the number exactly where it is and stops treating it as a description of the person reading it. Which brings us to the man who understood all of this before Neville did. Abdullah was not a comforting teacher. The two of them met in Manhattan at the start of the 1930s, and the study ran on for years. Hebrew, scripture, and what Abdullah called the laws of mind. Everything we know about the man reaches us through his student, who kept returning to him in talks for decades afterward, with a mixture of reverence and something that still sounded a little like a grudge. Because Abdullah did something to him that Neville, at the time, experienced as cruelty. There was family back in Barbados and no money for the passage. He carried the problem to his teacher the way any of us would carry it, hoping for a method, or at the very least for sympathy. And here is the part that matters. It is not the instruction Abdullah gave. That part gets told constantly. It is what Abdullah refused to do afterward. In Neville's own account of it, he said, "He never discussed it with me. When I asked him how would I go there, he would not even answer me." Would not even answer. Neville came back. Of course he came back. He came back the way you come back, with the reasonable question, the practical objection, the sensible request for a progress report. And Abdullah gave him nothing. He would not entertain the question. He would not discuss the how. On one telling, he ended the conversation before it started and shut the door. Read as biography. That is a story about a difficult old man. Read as method. It is the most sophisticated thing in this entire teaching. Because think about what Neville was actually asking for every time he came back. He was asking to step outside the state and look at it. Just for a second. Just to check. And you cannot check on a state from outside it, for the same reason you cannot test whether you are asleep. The checking is the exit. The moment Neville stood outside the assumption to ask how it was performing, he was no longer a man who was going to Barbados. He was a man in New York with a question about money. Abdullah was not withholding information. The man had years of Hebrew and scripture and mind training to give, and he gave all of it. What he would not hand over was a progress report, because there is no such thing. What he was doing was refusing to hold the door open. Every teacher you have ever had would have answered that question. Kindly, at length. They would have explained the mechanism, reassured him about the timeline, given him a supplementary exercise for the anxious nights. And every one of those kind answers would have pulled him out of the suit to examine the stitching. He removed the exit. That is what he did, for as long as it took. And this is the thing I want to correct, because the word rewired gets used loosely, and it matters here. Abdullah did not install a belief in Neville Goddard. He did not hand him a superior argument, or a better technique, or a secret phrase out of the Hebrew. If a belief were all it took, Neville had already heard the belief, and it had already failed to hold, the same way it has failed to hold for you. What Abdullah took away was a habit, one specific habit, so automatic that Neville could not see it as a habit at all, the habit of consulting his circumstances. That is the entire rewiring. Everything Neville had ever done, every ambition and every plan, ran through a single reflex first. Check the conditions. See what is possible. Take the reading from the outside world and let it set the ceiling. And a man who does that has already decided the outcome before he begins, because the outside world can only ever report what is already there. Abdullah broke the reflex by refusing to feed it. What we can document is one prolonged episode, the Barbados months, where every time Neville reached for the reading, there was nothing there to grab. Whether he ran the same silence on everything else, no record tells us. On this one thing, he held it long enough to leave a mark Neville was still describing in old age. And it cost Neville something. You can hear that in how he tells the story late in life, still faintly astonished at how unyielding the man was. He wanted his teacher to be reasonable with him for one afternoon, and his teacher would not be. He wanted somebody to acknowledge that the situation was genuinely difficult, and nobody did. And he never once called it cruelty afterward. Whatever it cost him at the time, he went on crediting the man for it until the end. And he reached Barbados. He was still telling audiences about it decades later. Now the uncomfortable part for the rest of us. You do not have an Abdullah. There is no one in your life who will refuse to discuss your circumstances with you. Your friends will sympathize. Your family will help you rehearse the problem in detail. Every algorithm you touch will hand you more evidence for the state you are already in. Which means the refusal has to come from you. You have to be the one who declines to open the conversation, including the one you hold in your own head at 2 a.m. That is a harder job than Neville had, and it is the actual work. And now we can put a number on it, because Neville did. He gives it twice in that lecture in 2 different registers. The plain version is the one he says outright about states. You must persist in staying in the new state, he said, until it becomes natural. The other version is the one with the number in it, and I want to be accurate about where he was pointing when he said it. He was talking about forgiveness, about the work of holding a picture of another person as you would like them to be until you have talked yourself into it. And he asks himself how many times that has to be done. He reaches for the phrase out of Matthew, the answer Jesus gives Peter when Peter asks how many times he is required to forgive. 70 times 7. Then he gives his own gloss on it, and the gloss is the part that transfers. 70 times 7, he said, or as long as it takes me to convince myself that it is true. That is the answer. That is the number. As long as it takes to convince yourself. It is an unsatisfying answer, and it is the only honest one. And you can tell it is honest precisely because nobody selling you anything would ever say it. There is no 14-day protocol. The duration stays unfixed because the clock is not running on the universe. It runs on you. What it measures is how deep the old body of beliefs went, and how much repetition it takes to lay a new one down over it. Now I have to square 2 words before they trip you, because so far they sound like 2 different instructions. The suit says duration. Wear the thing continuously, and eventually it goes quiet. 70 times 7 says repetition. Go back to it, and back to it, and back to it again. Both are true, and the second is how you get the first. Nobody holds a state unbroken for a month. You will lose it inside the first hour, standing in a queue, or on a phone call, or the moment somebody asks how business is going. That is not failure. That is just what a mind does. The returning is how the duration gets built. Every time you notice you have stepped out and you step back in without making a scene about it, the total goes up. The suit does not stay on for a week. It goes back on every morning, until the morning you stop noticing you are wearing it. There is a mercy in that, which nobody points out. If the requirement is repetition rather than intensity, then you do not need a breakthrough. Forget the perfect session, the emotional peak, the night it finally feels real. You need attendance. A man who shows up flat and unconvinced, 70 times 7, gets there. A man who has one extraordinary evening and then spends a month checking the mailbox does not. So what does that actually look like in your week? It looks like this. You pick the state. Not the outcome, not the sum, not the arrival date. The state. The attitude of mind of the person who is no longer in financial trouble. Then you notice everything that man has quietly stopped doing. He is not rehearsing the shortfall to himself in the shower, or narrating his position to strangers, or opening the banking app to feel something, or doing arithmetic at 2 in the morning. None of those are neutral habits. Every one of them is a sentence in the old body of beliefs, spoken out loud, keeping it current. You occupy the new one by conducting yourself, internally, the way that man conducts himself. Quietly, in private, with no announcement. And when the fraudulent feeling arrives, and it will arrive, often, you do not argue with it, and you do not treat it as a verdict. You recognize it. That is the new suit. That is all that is. It means the thing is new, and new is a stage, not a sentence. Then you do it again tomorrow, feeling nothing in particular. Neville put the instruction in one sentence, and it is worth hearing in his own phrasing. I urge you, he said, to use your own wonderful creative power and deliberately move into the state of your choice. Make it now, by occupying the state long enough so that it feels natural. Occupying long enough. Every load-bearing word in that sentence is about duration, and not one of them is about intensity. This is why Neville said, no one knows or cares. He was not making a point about other people. What he was doing was cutting the last rope. The imaginary audience that makes you feel like a fraud is the last thing tethering you to the old state, and it is not there. Nobody is checking. Nobody assigned you your position. The only person maintaining it is the one who keeps stepping outside to see whether he is still in it. Look back at what you actually tried, and be fair to yourself about it. You did not fail at this. Nobody handed you the missing piece. You were told to feel the thing as already yours, and you did. And it felt like lying. And nobody had mentioned that it feels like lying for everyone, including the man who taught it, standing on Fifth Avenue in a $30 suit, convinced that strangers were staring. He wore it anyway. It stopped being new. And then he was simply a man in a suit. Everything you want is already the correct size. It is only unworn. If this landed somewhere real, you belong here. Subscribe to the Goddard Code. We work through the actual mechanics of Neville Goddard's law, one piece at a time, without the shortcuts and without the promises nobody can keep. Tell me in the comments how long you lasted before you stepped out to check. I read them, and you are going to find you are in very ordinary company. And carry his own words out with you from that night in 1968. Walk in the state until it becomes natural. The moment the feeling is natural, wealth is yours.